Tonight, arriving in New York City ahead of his arrest and arraignment. What to expect after former President Donald Trump surrenders to law enforcement to face criminal charges. Plus, a different 2024 Republican presidential candidate is hoping to steal the GOP spotlight.
To make sure we go back to remain in Mexico?
Candidate Nikki Haley tours the U.S.-Mexico border with a Texas congressman to outline some of her first campaign promises. And later, anti-Semitism on the rise in Texas. What some experts say is the driving force behind the spike in recent incidents. Capital Tonight starts right now. Thanks for joining us here on Capital Tonight. I'm Karina Kling. Former President Donald Trump is in New York City tonight. Tomorrow morning, he'll become the first former or sitting president ever to appear in court charged with a crime. He's expected to spend this evening back in Trump Tower strategizing with his legal team, then surrender to authorities in the morning. He was indicted by a Manhattan grand jury last week. The indictment is currently sealed, but is said to contain more than 30 counts related to document fraud connected to hush money payments made during the 2016 presidential campaign. The exact charges will remain unknown until Trump appears in court. Trump was in Texas last month for his first 2024 presidential campaign rally where he railed against the probe. He's vowed to continue his bid despite the legal challenges and will give a speech to supporters tomorrow night back at Mar-a-Lago. As Trump prepares to face criminal charges in New York, one of his political rivals traveled to the southern border in Texas. The visit by former United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley was the latest in a series of trips by prominent Republicans to criticize the current president's border policies. Our Washington reporter Rena Diamante has the details.
If I was in charge, I would close the border. It ain't that complicated.
I know, it's not rocket science.
Nikki Haley met with locals in a Texas border county on the front lines of the immigration debate, a place where migrants jump off freight trains from Mexico. The former United Nations ambassador was the latest in a long list of Republicans who have come to the border to bash President Joe Biden, but the first Republican presidential candidate to do so.
How do the American people have any confidence in a president who refused to see a border problem and a secretary who refuses to see it as a crisis? It shows that you've got an administration that's inept.
Haley's visit included a stop at a shoe factory, a ride along with Border Patrol, and meetings with residents whose properties have been damaged. Haley accompanied Congressman Tony Gonzalez, whose district runs along 800 miles of the border. Gonzalez said they met with the family of those who died in a car crash with human smugglers.
What disturbs me the most is it's gotten so bad along the border that now it feels normal. There's nothing normal about this crisis. There's so much pain and anguish that is happening in this crisis.
Haley said that as president, she would seek to limit businesses from hiring undocumented immigrants and add at least 25,000 Border Patrol officers by eliminating other government jobs. While she did not mention Donald Trump by name, Haley said she supports the embattled former president's so-called Remain in Mexico policy that required asylum seekers to wait in that country as their legal proceedings play out.
They're not staying here. They're coming to your states. They're going into your schools. They're going into your hospitals. Your law enforcement officers are suddenly having to deal with them. They are now taking up your taxpayer dollars.
Texas Democratic Party leaders called Haley's visit a political stunt. In a statement, the chairman said Nikki Haley is exactly the same as Donald Trump and Texas Republicans when it comes to immigration. All fear-mongering and no solutions. In Washington, Rena Diamante, Capital Tonight.
A new candidate has joined Haley and Trump in a bid for the 2024 Republican presidential nomination. Over the weekend, former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson announced he's in. He's the first Republican to enter the race since Trump's indictment and says Trump should drop out of the running. The Texas Education Agency is moving to take more control of another major Texas school district. The agency says it will appoint conservators to oversee the Austin Independent School District, citing district failings in special education. This comes just weeks after the TEA appointed a board of managers to oversee Houston ISD. At an event today, longtime Texas Congresswoman and Houston mayoral candidate Sheila Jackson Lee criticized the move.
You've not offered money, you've not offered new teachers, you've not offered reading specialists, so you don't have anything to give, and all you're going to do is take money away from Houston Independent School District.
Civil rights organizations on Friday launched a federal complaint against the agency's takeover of Houston ISD. No word if they'll push for similar action regarding Austin. State Republican lawmakers say they want to clean up Texas voting rolls. They're pushing a bill where skipping elections could put voters at risk of being purged from the rolls. Our Charlotte Scott reports.
More than 8 million Texans cast a ballot in the November election. There was no widespread evidence of voter fraud, and election officials say it ran smoothly overall.
The chair now lays out Senate Bill 260.
But citing a study by the conservative organization Judicial Watch, Republican Senator Lois Kolkhorst says several smaller counties in Texas have voter registration rates that exceed 100% of eligible voters.
I will just say, gives a lack of confidence. I mean, you know, when people say, what do you mean we have more people registered than are eligible to vote? And I don't like that.
Her bill is advancing through the Senate. Essentially, it would put unresponsive voters on a suspense list if they haven't cast a ballot in more than 2 years. And if they don't respond to a notice for another 2 years, they'd be kicked off the voter rolls. North Texas Senator Angela Paxton says she still gets a voter registration card for her son, even though he hasn't lived at home since 2015. Senator Kolkhorst says this bill would address that.
It's 2023. There ought to be a way to keep things more current than that.
Just because you skip some.
Several Texans signed up to testify for and against the bill. 2 election judges have different views of it.
The voter rolls are a huge problem. We've been looking at them for quite some time, and I'm interested in anything that can clean them up and make them better.
If too many people get a letter saying they're on suspense, even though the fine print might say you can fix this, they would absolutely assume that they cannot vote. So I've seen that happen many, many times. So we don't want to go there. It's a wrong direction to go.
One political science professor says if someone hasn't voted for a long period of time, it's often an indicator that they've moved and are registered elsewhere. But if the bill passes, he expects it will impact a small group of Texans.
It's not likely to prevent much fraud, but I think we can be pretty much in agreement that there will be a subset of Texans who will turn out to vote and not be able to vote because of this legislation.
For Capitol Tonight, I'm Charlotte Scott.
Charlotte, thank you. And with us now is the Quorum Report's Harvey Kronberg. Harvey, it's always good to see you.
Must be a Monday.
Must be a Monday. What do you think this would mean for voters if this bill by Senator Kolkhorst were to pass?
Frankly, the Senate continues to embarrass itself when it comes to election law. The presumption historically has always been that the presumption is with the citizen that they have the right to vote, and it's up to the state to prove they don't have the right to vote. Now they've shifted the presumption over to the citizen proving that they should have a right to vote. This is coming out of the same legislature that wants to ban polling voting machines on college campuses. Whether you elect to vote or not to vote, it's very hard to see any sensible reasoning that leads you to having skipped a couple of elections means that you have to register again. When it's essentially a right of any citizen to do so.
What about the possibility it promotes more voting, knowing that you could get kicked off the voter rolls? Is there an opportunity?
Well, that presumes
for that?
People pay attention, and frankly, we've watched enough elections together to know that nobody really starts paying attention until about 3 to 4 weeks before early voting. Depending on the language of the bill and when they decided to erase your name. Yeah. Remember, you have to typically register a couple of months before the election. We don't have same-day registration. We have no way to really cure it. And frankly, it's very difficult to see this as anything other than voter suppression.
I want to ask you about the TEA, the Texas Education Agency, moving to appoint conservators for Austin ISD. Of course, comes after the Houston takeover. I mean, what do you think this involvement from the state signals?
That they're trying to degrade the public school system in order to sell their voucher program for all practical purposes. The optics of taking over the largest school district in the state during a legislative session, when in fact their metrics have been improving, or taking over, actually they're just going to take over some areas of authority in AISD. None of this had to happen during a legislative session, but you've got the governor cruising around the state, appearing predominantly in front of religious schools, and essentially saying that his implicit message is public schools have failed, and what they're doing is creating an optical backdrop for it. In the meantime, 43,000 teachers decided not to sign up to teach again this year, and I would suspect that the messaging they're getting from the state has something to do with it.
Well, and how does the state involvement change anything within the districts? I mean, what will we see, or how will parents and students be affected?
Well, that's the problem. I have yet to find any metrics that demonstrate what it means to be successful. So as long as we don't have standards, we can say these guys failed, but what is the metric that shows that the problem has been resolved? And let's remember, when it comes to children, particularly with Child Protective Services, which takes children out of abusive circumstances, abusive homes, things like that, we have totally underfunded that, and so we've got kids sleeping on office floors and Child Protective Services until I see some metrics that tell me what the standard of success is that they are reaching for. Yeah. I'm just going to presume that it's theatrics and kabuki theater.
Well, we have about a minute left. I mean, what do you think this could mean for any legislative changes? And you're speaking to this, but and the push not only from this, but what we could see from Houston, and how lawmakers could push back. Democratic ones.
Let's remember
that
this law was originally passed because of State Representative Harold Dutton, who was essentially frustrated with the low performance of two predominantly African American high schools in Harris County. Harris County, on other metrics, had actually been improving. I don't think that there's going to be any legislative change, only because all the oxygen is being sucked out by the voucher vote, or the voucher issue. The governor's put all of his political capital behind vouchers. He's barely been at the Capitol, and I'm not sure what they're selling, except for that they're trying to create the optics that public schools have failed.
Yeah, well, an issue we'll continue to watch. School vouchers, obviously, we're talking a lot about on the show, and we'll continue to do that in the coming weeks. Harvey Kronberg, thank you.
My pleasure.
Still to come on Capitol tonight, walking back a claim why the state dropped its effort to punish Harris County over police spending. Plus, anti-Semitic hate crimes are on the rise in Texas, where the state ranks and what's being done to try to stop such incidents. Welcome back. Let's get a check of some of the other political stories making headlines across Texas. Democrats are looking to take back a South Texas congressional seat flipped by the GOP last election. Representative Monica De La Cruz became the first Republican to win the 15th congressional district last November. Some Democrats attribute the loss to gerrymandering by state Republicans and a lack of funding from national party leaders. This time around, Democrats say they'll put a lot more money toward reclaiming the seat. The state comptroller backed off his claims that Harris County illegally defunded a constable's office. Glenn Hager accused county leaders of cutting the budget without voter approval, which is now required under state law. County leaders disputed that, which set off a legal back and forth, and ultimately Harris County won, with Hager rescinding his finding today. And some Republican state senators reversed their votes to allow kids currently receiving gender-affirming care to continue doing so. The reversal essentially puts the bill back to its original version. Texas has filed more anti-trans bills in its legislature than any other state this session. Texas is seeing a rise in anti-Semitism. That's according to a recent audit from the Anti-Defamation League. Texas had a record 211 incidents last year. The state now ranks 5th in the country for this type of hate. The majority of incidents reported in Texas in 2022 were either vandalism or harassment tied to white supremacist propaganda. Nationally, the number of anti-Semitic incidents last year was the highest since the Jewish advocacy group began keeping track in 1979. With us now to discuss this further is Jackie Nierenberg. She's the regional director of the Anti-Defamation League for the Austin region. Jackie, nice to see you. Thanks for being on the program.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. What is driving the rise in these anti-Semitic hate crimes?
Well, it's really hard to pinpoint one single reason why these incidents are on the rise, but there are several trends that seem to be contributing. The emboldening of extremists and hate groups in political discourse, for example, the growing acceptance of anti-Semitism in mainstream pop culture, and also the rise in online hate content. All of that came together to probably result in these high numbers this year.
Jackie, Texas, as mentioned, ranks 5th nationally. We've got a list of where some of the other states above us rank. I mean, why do you think Texas ranks so high? And are you surprised by these rankings in terms of the other New York, California, New Jersey, and Florida?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to use a phrase that's used quite often these days, and that is, it's shocking but not surprising. So Texas, because of its sheer population and the fact that it has large universities, those two things make it a much more likely place for this kind of activity to take place. And Texas is also home to one of the larger extremist organizations. So there's going to be more activity just because of that as well.
What specific incidents can you point to of anti-Semitism here in Texas? I know a lot of people will be reminded of the hostage situation last year at Beth Israel Synagogue in Colleyville. That's a big one that comes to mind. I mean, what else are we talking?
Well, for the most part, we're talking about vandalism and harassment in the form of flyering. A lot of people report that they receive flyers on their driveways. They're often included in a little baggie with some pebbles in it to weigh it down. And what's interesting is that these groups know how to sort of get right up to the line of what's legal to spread their hateful rhetoric. When they do that kind of flyering on people's driveways, for example, it's not anything more than littering, unless they can be caught trespassing. So flyering is the most common kind of harassment we see in Texas and certainly in the Central Texas region.
Yeah, I'm rising to the level of the hostage situation and different things like that, I'm sure, as you're tracking this. We just have about a minute left, but what is needed to try to fight these kinds of acts of anti-Semitism? I mean, what is the ADL doing? What are others doing to try to combat this?
So we work with law enforcement partners all over the country at the federal, state, and local levels to keep them informed of what we know and exchange information with them. We also advocate. We work with our legislatures at the state level and also at the national level to promote legislation that is that helps with anti-bias education, for example, Holocaust education, which ties directly to this kind of behavior and why we all need to be vigilant. This can happen to any group, and so we all need to be there for each other as allies. So if people hear some kind of rhetoric, even if it's the most innocent or unintentional kind of anti-Semitic rhetoric using a trope, we encourage people to, call it out. And the easiest way to do that is just to ask a question, like, why are you saying that? Or what exactly does that mean? And that kind of takes down the tone of the rhetoric, and it also allows somebody to answer the question without feeling attacked. So just be there for each other.
Jackie Nierenberg of the Anti-Defamation League, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
An abortion fund says it will again help Texans seek abortions in states where it's legal. The announcement by the Lilith Fund comes 1 month after a court ruled Texas could not use old laws to stop organizations from helping people access abortions out of state. The Guttmacher Institute found the average Texan would have to drive at least 515 miles to get an abortion legally. Still to come on Capitol tonight, putting the charge on electric car owners, what Texas lawmakers are proposing as the number of electric vehicles increases. The Texas legislature is considering bills that would affect electric cars. The Senate passed a bill to make electric vehicle owners pay a registration fee plus annual renewal fees to make up for the fact that they don't pay a gas tax. Two other bills would create guidelines for how charging stations would be built and paid for and how they would be registered and undergo inspections. There are currently 329 fast charging stations across Texas. And in Texas, the average price of a gallon of gas sits right above $3. That's a few cents lower than the national average, but overall up from a month ago. Gasoline prices are expected to rise in the coming months after a surprise announcement this weekend that Saudi Arabia and other major oil-producing nations have decided to pump less crude oil. Reuben Jones is in Washington with more.
Oil-producing countries in the Middle East are planning to decrease production by about 1.1 million barrels a day. Now, global oil prices spiked 6% Monday when markets opened a day after the announcement.
And it caused crude oil prices to go up a little over $5 basically instantaneously. So that $5 by itself would be about 13 cents at the pump.
Saudi Arabia's energy ministry says the decision is a precautionary measure to support oil prices amid concerns that rising oil stockpiles and the weakening global economy could cause prices to fall. This cut comes after the alliance of countries known as OPEC Plus, and including Saudi Arabia and Russia, announced in October a production cut of about 2 million barrels a day.
Saudi Arabia and the OPEC nations are a cartel, and they're trying to maximize their revenues, make as much money as they can, at the same time making sure they don't promote too much green energy.
All this comes as the summer travel season is about to begin in the U.S., a time when prices at the pump normally rise. The average price of a gallon of regular currently sits at $3.50, according to AAA. In Washington, Reuben Jones, Spectrum News.
And before we go tonight, First Lady Dr. Jill Biden was in Dallas this weekend for the NCAA Women's Basketball Championship. She sat in a suite with tennis legend Billie Jean King to watch the game. LSU beat Iowa to claim its first ever women's basketball championship. Biden is an avid sports fan. She attended the Super Bowl and Game 4 of the World Series last fall. And that is all the time that we have tonight. We're back again tomorrow with the latest in Texas politics. Until then, thanks for watching. Stay safe and have a great night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. And for more refreshing stories about your community, click the subscribe button right over here. You can also download our Spectrum News app to get live news coverage, weather alerts, and more wherever you are. And don't forget to tune in to Channel 55 on Dish and DirecTV for live local reporting every single day. We'll see you then.